So introduction to LINQ queries with C#. A query is an expression that retrieves data from a data source. Queries are usually expressed in a specialized query language. Different languages have been developed over time for the various types of data sources. For example, SQL for relational databases and XQuery for XML. Therefore, developers have had to learn a new query language for each type of data source or data format that they must support. LINQ simplifies the situation by offering a consistent model for working with data across various kinds of data sources and formats. In a LINQ query, you are always working with objects. You use the same basic coding pattern to query and transform data in XML documents, SQL databases, ADO.NET datasets, .NET collections, and any other format for which LINQ provider is available. So essentially, LINQ queries can be broken down into three parts. First part is obtaining the data source. Second part, create the query. Third part, actually executing the query and getting a result. So the following image provides a great visual breakdown of how LINQ queries work. First, we start with the data source, which is self-explanatory, is any source of data that we're going to run queries against. So next in line is the query itself. So they give a nice little example of the syntax from where select. We'll go over this in actual code in a little bit, so hang tight. But essentially the query specifies what information to retrieve from the data source or sources. In addition, the query is also the part in which you would specify how the information will be sorted, grouped, or basically shaped up. So at this time, at this phase, the query variable only stores the commands for the query. It does not actually execute and get the values from that query until you get to the last step, query execution. So in this example, query execution only happens once you actually get inside this loop and it's trying to access that information. And once it's trying to access that information, that's the moment that C# will actually run your query and gather the information and the results and then give you those results for you to be able to, utilize in some way or form. This is also known as deferred execution, which basically is saying the query is materialized and executed when you iterate using the for each loop. Let's start by looking at an example similar to the base example given by Microsoft. We have an array, a query, and finally a loop. And this loop is going to display the values from the query. So that being said, we have the three essential pieces of a LINQ query, and they are getting the data source, the query creation, and then the actual query execution. Okay, so right before we start running this, let's break down what we're about to do. We have an array, which is 1 to 10. We have the query, which is basically going to give you even numbers as a result, and the loop, which is when we're actually going to display or execute the LINQ query to give you the even numbers on display. Throughout the rest of the video, I'm going to label which lines are linked to which of the three essential pieces of a LINQ query in the form of comments stating data source, query creation, and query execution. So up top here we have those three pieces, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and put this comment over the data source, which is in this case the array. I'm going to get this, the query creation, and put it over which part is the query creation, which is right here. And finally the query execution is, believe it or not, right in this loop. Okay, so let's run this, and we control F5, and sure enough we get exactly what we're looking for, even numbers. So just for kicks, let's try creating one more query. In here we'll say var greater than 5 query equals from number in sample array where number is greater than 5, select number. And what we'll do is we'll just copy this value of the query creation or query variable, replace it. And if we control F5, we see all the numbers that are greater than 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So next, let's cover how to include multiple filters in your query, aka multiple where clauses. There are basically two ways to achieve the same thing. The first way is by using the AND operator, and the second is by using multiple where clauses. Let's start by modifying what we already have under query creation. So we'll keep these two variables, but we'll just change the names so it's clear what we're doing with it using AND filter. And this one we'll call using multiple where filter. So they both have the same, retain the same structure from number in sample array, where number is, let's do odd, and number is less than 5. Same scenario here. Let's do from number in sample array where number is going to be odd and where number is less than 5. So next, let's just copy and paste over here on the query execution, and let's change these values to match with these two new variables that we have. So essentially we should expect to see the same set of numbers. Okay, so let's control F5 it. And sure enough, we see 1 and 3 for the first query execution, which is using an AND filter, and we see 1 and 3 again, which is in regards to the second filter, which is using multiple where clauses. So the next part of this video is us using LINQ in relations to strings. So first, let's start up by cleaning up some of the space, because I'm sure this program is going to get a lot bigger. So we'll start by making a region, int, and we'll end region. And we'll do the same for the strings. We'll make a new region for strings, and end region. The next step is to add comments for the 3 parts of a LINQ query, which is, again, here, it's data source, query creation, and query execution. So in this case, let's start by declaring the data source. So we're going to have an array of strings called my countries. It's going to be of size 5. Whoa. And the predefined values will be United States, China, let's do Germany, Iceland, and finally India. So next, let's move on to query creation. So I'm just going to copy and paste something I already typed to save time for the video. As you can see by the variable name, we're going to look for countries that have the letter I inside of it. And finally, we have the query execution. So we'll do that by making a for loop, for each loop, for each string country, and contains letter I. Let's display the values. Okay, so all we have to do is let's run it. And sure enough, okay, so we have some of the values from the previous run with the ints, but we also have the values that we want right now. We have 5 countries, and Germany is the only one that doesn't have an I, and sure enough, we have 4 countries, all of which contain an I. So now let's comment this out, as well as comment out the values that we're going to print out for this. And we'll make another query and execute that next query. Alright, so for the next query string, we'll just grab it from this notepad here. So as you can see, we're looking for a string that's going to match United States. So once again, the only other thing we need to do to actually get the results is go under query execution. We'll do for each. You know what, instead of retyping it, let's copy paste. And we'll just change this to match a string. Uncomment this and let's run it. Sure enough, we see United States because United States is in the array of strings. So there's actually one more interesting thing that we can do here, in that we can use a function with the query string or query creation step. Whoops, let me fix this typo. So in order to do that, let's go and make a function here. And we'll add that right above here. And we'll be returning a bool. We'll call it get Germany. It's receiving a string that we'll just call my string for simplicity's sake. And here we have string Germany equals, what are we looking for? Germany. And then we'll do the comparison. If my string is equal to then do something. In this case, we're going to say it's true, else return false. Okay, so how do we use that, right? So we'll make another query over here. Let's just copy and paste this one. And instead, we'll call this using function filter from country in my countries where get Germany. And we'll pass over the country, select country. So that should be good. And over here, we'll just copy and paste this. We'll comment this guy out. And we'll just swap it so that we get the proper query. And next, just run it. Okay. Let's control F5 it. Sure enough, we get Germany. Alright, so that pretty much concludes what we're going to cover in terms of this section of working with strings, an array, and the ability to use a function. So next, we're going to do some examples with XML docs, or XML in general. Okay, so I already have an XML doc that I can copy and paste in here. So let's just go ahead and add that solution. We'll do new item, XML file. Call this sample XML. And let's just paste it in there, save it. Alright, there we go. We got our XML doc. So now we'll go back to our program. Let's minimize that. We'll make a new region. And just like before, we start with these three key elements of a LINQ query. So for XML, we're going to have to load the XML document and then run queries against it. So that's going to be our data source. In order to do it for this example, we're going to need another library here, of which we'll go to the top. And it's as simple as using system.xml.link. Alright, so now we're ready to actually load up the XML document as the data source. So what we're going to do is xdocument. We'll call it XML doc equals xdocument.load. And then the path to the file. In order to find the path to this file, all we really need to do click on the sample XML, we see that we have the path right here. Just gonna copy paste that over to where I put path to the file. And I think we're gonna have to swap these the other way. And there we go. So we have our data source ready to go. Alright, so next it's the query creation. More or less the same, slight difference. Just copy and paste this from my notepad here. Essentially, we're going to look inside the XML document and find all the things that will match under the name attribute. So in this case, swapping over to the XML doc, we should see all of these attributes being displayed for us. Alright, so you might notice that IEnumerable is throwing an error right now. It's because we're missing a reference. So let's go ahead to the top and we'll add it right here using system.collections.generic. Oops. There you go. If we go down, we're good to go. So now for the final part, query execution, just as before, it's a simple loop, and we're just going to say for string name and list of names, you know, display them. Okay, looks like we have a remnant from the previous example for strings, but excluding Germany, we see Ellen, Adams, and Taiyi, just as we saw in the XML doc. Alright, so to avoid seeing values that we don't want to get mixed up with, let's go back, expand strings, we'll comment this output out, and we might as well comment this output as well, since we're going to make another query. So the next example we're going to do for a query is going to be a bit more complicated, I guess. We're going to get the attribute types. So in this case, what we're going to target is address type, and we see shipping, address type, and billing. So we want to display the different types that we have here, shipping and billing. So we have this copied and pasted. We'll just give it a new name, list of address types, and we're just going to make a small modification to the query in that we're looking for the address, and we are going to be selecting the item dot attribute. And what type? Oops. And there we go. So same as before, let's just copy and paste this. For the actual execution of it, we'll copy and paste this list of address types to see what we got here. Sure enough, we see exactly what we wanted, shipping and billing. Alright, and finally, we'll do one last one for XML. In this case, we're actually going to look through the document, find the price, and determine some filters, as in, you know, in this case, it's less than a certain amount, and then put it in order of least to greatest or greatest to least. I just want to give a quick reminder that if you're at a loss of finding an XML doc or some equivalent, that all of these files are inside the GitHub link, and you can use this for your own example as well to follow through or follow along with us. So for simplicity's sake, let's just copy and paste this. Let me get rid of these comments so it's not jarring. Okay, so let's modify this. So we'll get prices that are less than 40. So we expect to see $39.98, $29.99, but we don't want to see $148.95. So that being said, this will be called less than 40. And we'll just make a few modifications. We'll get this called item. and we are going to add some filters here. So say where type float item dot element US. What was it called? US price. Is less than 40. Order by item dot element product name. Okay, so we want to see baby monitor, 500 gigabyte hard drive. Let's remove this extra quote. And let's push this back. This will be an element, not an attribute, and it's going to be product name. So let's comment this out. Let's copy paste this, and we'll just change it to be less than 40 instead of list of address types. And we'll uncomment this and run it. Great. Here we go. Forgot to uncomment this. Now let's run it. Sure enough, we see 500 gigabyte hard drive, baby monitor. Are they in the right order? Yes, they are. It looks like this is the cheaper one. That's more expensive. So we got exactly the results we wanted. So the final type we're going to cover in this video as a data source is going to be data tables. And before we do that, let's make sure we comment this out and we close this region. We'll make a new region. So before we begin, we're going to need another reference. So we're going to go to the top here. We're going to add using system data. Alright, so we're ready to begin. We'll start by going to my GitHub and we'll copy and paste this data table of history's greatest dogs, fictional dogs at least. So from here, in order to see what this table looks like in its entirety, let's do some display data row and dogs dot row. Make these three temp variables, and this one will be for the breed. To string. Let's just copy this line. This will be for the age. This will be for the name. Okay, and this should be rows. If we run this, we'll see our data table. Looks like I added an extra tab somewhere. Either way, that doesn't matter. That's besides the point. But yeah, so there's our value, and now we're going to work with this data table using LINQ. So one thing before I forget, this data table is the source. And as always, we want to dictate the next step, which is the query creation, and finally the query execution. So now that we have that, let's create our query. Let's call it is a do. This will make sense in a second as I type this query out. From dog in dogs as enumerable, where dog dot field string. Let's look for has inside the name. So basically what we want to do here is we want to see if the dog name has do in it. So we want to see Scooby and Scrappy Doo. Okay. So now we'll do the query execution. We'll make our loop over here for each data row, and is a do display. Let's display the values that are in here. And that should be good. So if you run this, and first let's comment this part out so we don't have extra values. Now let's run it. That's cool. Let's see what went wrong here. I think I forgot to comment this out. There we go. We see Scooby-Doo and we see Scrappy-Doo. Alright, let's do one more query just for good measure of understanding how we can use data table set and sets with LINQ. So what we'll do, we'll copy this one, we'll make another one, and this time let's target Crypto, the Kryptonian dog, aka Superman's dog. So we'll call this Super Dog. We don't want the name, but we do want to look for the breed, and we want to make sure that the breed is Kryptonian. So we'll do equals Kryptonian. We'll change this query execution from data row in is a do to Super Dog, and that should be good. And just for good measure, let's also type out Crypto's breed. Okay, so we run this, we see Crypto, the Kryptonian. So that pretty much concludes this intro to LINQ video. What you're looking at here is a GitHub where you can find the project files, and as you can see, it's way more documented than the examples I went through over this video. There's plenty of comments for you to follow through to learn from, as well as most of them have more examples that you could run, and you could just tweak all of these values so that you can, do further testing for more understanding. And again, we pretty much covered how to use it with ints, how to use it with strings, how to use it with XML, and finally how to use it with a data table. So there's also the ability to use LINQ and SQL, but that's a whole nother topic, and I think will be a video in and of itself. So stay tuned for that one. Otherwise, thanks for watching. If you like this or it helped you in some way, please do like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps grow the channel. So until next time, take it easy everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe.